Hi there, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Andy Taylor. I'm the Practice Director for Solutions Integration at PSM Partners, and we're going to talk to you today about enabling your remote workforce with Windows Virtual Desktop. So thanks for joining. You can actually ask questions using the chat window at any point in time. We will likely address most of your questions at the end. Our presentation is not super long here, so presentation is probably only about 15-20 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for your questions. We should be wrapped up in about a half hour. So just a quick overview of PSM Partners, if you're not familiar with us. So we were founded in 2014. We are a technology firm based in the Chicago region and focused heavily on mid-market. We've had rapid, steady growth since our founders started the company 6 years ago. We have a really strong Microsoft relationship. We're at about 60 full-time employees now. We really pride ourselves in having minimal customer churn. We're really focused on long-term relationships. And I joined PSM Partners in November of 2019. And I have to say the thing I like the most is just the integrity and just the way we engage with our customers. So focusing on the Microsoft partnership, we are actually a Microsoft Gold partner. We've got 4 Microsoft Gold competencies, as you can see there. We're very heavily focused on cloud transformation. So we help companies adopt and embrace the cloud. And you've got some success stories on your screen there. I'm not going to go through them now, but there's a couple of examples of some firms where we've helped them be successful. So we're going to talk a bit about desktop and application virtualization. And just to make sure that we've got a level playing field and everybody understands, I'm going to just kind of review really quickly what those concepts actually are. So desktop and application virtualization, the term that used to be out there was VDI. You still see, if you do a search on the internet, you'll still find VDI out there. It's still used a lot. That term is starting to fall out of favor now. And I think the reason for that is because computing is no longer about the desktop, of course. A lot of times we're doing a lot of very productive things on our tablets, on our phones. So it's not just desktop computers anymore. But the thing that is consistent about desktop and application virtualization is that the processing power is being taken away from your mobile device and it's going to the cloud or it's going to a data center. So that means that the device you're holding is not running all the processing or calculations needed to run the application. The application's being run remotely and you're just seeing the results on your screen. So you can have individual applications virtualized, or you can have an entire desktop. So you can have what looks like a remote control where you're just remoting into a desktop and you see an entire desktop experience, or it could just be one specific application that gets published, and you can use that application just as if it were loaded locally on your computer or on your tablet. End user device can be a PC, it can be a thin client if you're using those, it can be a web browser or a mobile device. So really the mantra, everywhere in the technology community and in the business world in general is any device, anywhere. That's what everybody wants now. That's what's kind of becoming a reality in terms of the way we do business, is being able to work with any application on any device wherever you are. And the top vendors in this space are Microsoft, VMware, and Citrix. Now we're going to talk about Microsoft today. The reason I mentioned VMware and Citrix is because for the longest time, they've pretty much been the ones to beat. And Microsoft has always had a solution that was very affordable and easy to deploy, but it really didn't have the level of features and functionality as VMware and Citrix. And what we're seeing now is with Windows Virtual Desktop, the game is changing. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some scenarios where you might use desktop and application virtualization. So there's just a few on your screen here. These are all examples of where desktop and application virtualization makes sense. So when you've got security and regulation in very heavily regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, and government, sometimes it's not even possible to load the application on everyone's computer that needs to use it. It's just not physically possible. And then if you take today's environment where people are remote, it's even more difficult because they might not even be on a corporate device. And then the same thing for the elastic workforce. Yeah, everyone knows that companies expand and contract a lot, and there's a lot, of course, as the gig economy, as people call it. There's a lot of situations where people are working on a contract basis. sometimes those contractors don't have a corporate computer to use, but they still need to be able to use the line of business applications that people within the company use. And then there are a lot of very specific employee scenarios. Road warriors, obviously people aren't traveling right now as much due to COVID-19, but you have a lot of people that are working remotely. Probably the majority of information workers are now remote. Call centers are another use case. And the reason for call centers is because a lot of times with call centers, you have a number of people that have an identical configuration, and they need to be able to move to a different desk and use a different computer and have the same experience. So that's why desktop and application virtualization works so well in those environments. And then work from home, obviously, that's an obvious one. If you're working from home, you might not be on your corporate device. You might be on your own personal machine, or you might be on a different computer than what you normally use in the office. And then finally, specialized workloads. So again, sometimes you've got legacy applications. Maybe there's an old finance application that your organization's using that can't be upgraded yet. You're kind of stuck with it now. Doesn't work well on the desktop environment that you have. So that's another example of where desktop and application virtualization might make sense. Retail, a lot of times retail environments now are using these very specialized tablets. So you get the idea. Anywhere that you need you need to be able to abstract the application from the device that the person happens to be using. So what is Windows Virtual Desktop? So Windows Virtual Desktop is Microsoft's latest solution. That it's a virtual Windows 10 and Microsoft 365 experience, and it's all delivered and hosted in Azure, which is Microsoft's public cloud environment. So it replaces traditional VDI solutions, so the ones that you may be very familiar with from Citrix and VMware. It replaces Microsoft's own solution, RDS. That's the solution I mentioned before that was kind of the entry-level, low-feature solution. It replaces that as well. It's fully hosted in Azure. It's optimized for Microsoft 365. So if you use the Microsoft 365 suite, if you use all those applications, it's optimized for those. It gives you experience very similar to using a regular desktop or laptop. And it's got simplified deployment and management. So a little bit more, I'm going to talk just a little bit more about the benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop here. So one benefit is the user experience. So you can connect from any device. It's any HTML5 browser. Now Microsoft officially supports all the browsers you probably have heard of, Safari, Chrome, Firefox. It supports all the mainstream browsers that are actually typically out there, but it also, basically, they claim that it'll work with any browser that's compatible with HTML5. So they've really tried to make this as device independent as possible. And obviously works with other types of devices, mobile devices from Android and from Apple, no problem. It has enhanced security. So the Microsoft 365 security platform, we talked about that in our last webinar. So the functionality of WVD is seamlessly integrated into Microsoft 365. So you get all the benefits of Microsoft 365 security. It has simplified management, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail later, but it's a very easy to manage service. It does not take the level of administrative effort that traditional VDI solutions have typically taken. And it's a true desktop as a service solution. So that's another term you may see now, and that's DAS, desktop as a service. But essentially, that just means that the entire solution is hosted within Azure. So it's nothing that you have to build yourself. And it's got reduced costs in terms of licensing. So I think that's where the comparison against the other vendors out there, VMware and Citrix specifically, that's where the comparison really goes in Microsoft's favor. The cost is a huge difference because of the way it's licensed. And then finally, another benefit is that Microsoft is very, very bullish on this technology right now. And they're also recognizing the fact that people need to enable their remote workforces. So there is funding available a lot of times that can help with the deployment costs. So for our next slide, I'm going to actually hand over the baton to Jason Fritz. So Jason is a technical architect with PSM Partners, and he's going to walk through some of the architecture behind Windows Virtual Desktop.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. So as you can see, this is a little bit more in depth on the technical end of WVD, the infrastructure and management thereof. Some really good stuff here, though, to go over just so you get a better idea of some of the things that Andy has already touched on. One thing being the first note there. So WVD lives within Azure, but it also is behind your Azure AD tenant, I guess you could say. So any and all security that you have built into your Azure Active Directory tenant, whether it be Azure MFA or conditional access or any other security policies related to authentication and authorization to get into your Azure AD tenant or Microsoft 365, any, cloud-based applications. That same security applies when people are authenticating and accessing WVD. So it's nice, obviously that those same securities, are being applied to WVD, but it's also good from a centralization standpoint, right? You can manage all of your, your cloud-based applications. WVD just becomes another one of those that, you're managing the security and all the forms of authorization and authentication from your Azure AD tenant. The WVD session host virtual machines themselves, so they live within the confines of your Azure environment. They're IaaS VMs. It's a virtual machine living in Azure. But a nice thing about this is they tie directly into your Active Directory domain services ADDS. So they're actually, your session host VMs are actually computer objects that land in your Active Directory. They can be managed with group policies and group policy preferences, just as anything else would be in Active Directory. This also provides, WVD with the ability to access, any necessary domain resources as well, file and print servers, line of business applications you may have, in your on-premises data centers or in Azure. It basically completely integrates into your on-premises Active Directory, which is a very beneficial component. WVD can also utilize tools like Config Manager or Intune if you have either of those in place already. The session host VMs can be enrolled in either of those tools, for ease of management purposes as well. One thing, this is one of the bigger benefits I find in WVD compared to traditional, on-premises, VDI or remote desktop solutions. And that's where the control plane comes in. So the control plane is, what the term we use for the all the necessary components, the management components, I guess you could say, that exist within your on-premises remote desktop solution. These are all the pieces in the bottom right-hand quadrant of the slide in blue. Anyone that has remote desktop services or Citrix or VMware VDI, anything that, that's built out in your own data center, you have to provide access to those, to that solution, to your your desktop or application virtualization infrastructure. So that usually entails, remote gateway, load balancers, brokers, web servers with the WAN presence. There's security implications, obviously, to having all that infrastructure there. And all of those pieces all these pieces of the control plane are pieces that you have to manage and maintain as well. With WVD, Microsoft has taken all of those components of the control plane and they basically manage it for you now. It's a service they provide to you. So you don't have to deal with all of those pieces of the puzzle anymore. All you really have to manage are the things that really matter for your, desktop and application virtualization environment. The session hosts, the host pool themselves, the images, your applications, user profiles, network security and licensing. Like those are really the only things that fall onto you, as an IT provider, or if you manage your own internal IT infrastructure, those are the only things that you would have to, manage moving forward. The control plane is taken out of that equation. Another point in this slide up in the top right, a little to the left, there's multiple licensing options to get you into WVD as well. If you currently have Microsoft 365 licensing suites of any sort, there are some standalone and as Andy touched on, there is, universal connectivity, right? Like you can get to WVD from essentially any device, on the planet. Whether it be your mobile device, there's a, already a WVD client for Android and iOS, as well as obviously Windows and Linux and, all of the wide array of, endpoints that you may be connecting to WVD with. I'll hand this back to Andy then. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk about our PSM's rapid planning and assessment offering for WVD. So just to give you a feel for what this offering entails. So it's an accelerated planning and design engagement for WVD. So the idea is that we can quickly help you ascertain with your environment what's going to be required. If you're interested in WVD, what's that going to look like? So it provides a roadmap in terms of how you get there, how you get WVD deployed. It's customized for your environment based on your business needs, based on your current configuration. I should also add, it's, we're going to look at your line of business applications as well, because that's a huge piece of WVD and what it's needed for. So in terms of what's included, it's an on-site or virtual workshop. The workshop itself is most likely going to be less than a day. And then from that, we produce a deployment roadmap document. We'll actually provide some detailed recommendations, and we'll come back and deliver a summary presentation at the end. So this is our offering that we're putting out there, and we think this would be a great on-ramp to help you get started with WVD. So that's all I have in terms of slide content. So, and we're only 17 minutes after, so you got plenty of time. So at this time, I'd like to see what questions the group has. So one question here is, can the performance for each VDI be adjusted, as in for power users? Jason, can you take that one?
Yeah, for sure. Of course. There are multiple ways you can deploy a WVD host pool, which is basically a collection of session host VMs. You can deploy multiple host pools to meet the requirements of specific needs. Say you have GPU intensive workloads. You have users that run some pretty resource intensive applications. You can build specific session hosts, persistent or non-persistent as well. So by that I mean you can have like pooled session hosts where multiple multiple users can connect to the same session host. So they're they're in a pooled fashion, multiple people connecting to the same VM. Or you can have individual persistent machines for each individual user. So say you had one person that you considered a power user, you wanted to give them all the horsepower, you could create a session host just for them.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. That's a great question. So another question came up is, do the clients that use this service spend less on desktop hardware? And I'd say yes, as a general rule, yes, you can definitely get by with spending less on desktop hardware. In fact, I've seen some situations where organizations have been able to do this when they're not actually able to finish that rollout of all that new PC hardware that they want to get out to their organization. They're just not able to do it this year. Maybe it's going to take a year or two to do that hardware refresh that you want to do. So this definitely is a way to leverage existing hardware and be able to have people running the latest interface, the latest applications, without having to upgrade their machines. And then another question came up here. In the past, we've been told that we can't use this service with our existing ERP. Has Microsoft made it easier to use a variety of applications with WVD? So I don't know what your existing ERP is. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I mean, this is, WVD is one thing I guess we forgot to point out. It is the only available multi-session Windows 10 desktop virtualization solution.
That's
right. So multi-session, like I was talking about my answer to the last question, you can have multiple users, logged into the same, session host at the same time, and they have a full, fully immersed like Windows 10, desktop experience. So basically any application that would run on Windows 10 is going to run on Windows, run in Windows Virtual Desktop. There's no differentiation there. You're basically running Windows 10 in the cloud. If your application ran on Windows 10 on your desktop at home, it would run there just the same.
Good. So, so another question that came up is just around, what do I need to get started? Now, do I need to have an existing Azure subscription? Like, what's the requirements to get started with WVD if I'm starting from scratch? So, Jason, could you handle that one as well?
For sure. So, yeah, if you don't, you don't necessarily have to have anything to get started. All of that can be built out, but you would need to have, an Azure subscription for those WVD components, as we talked about, to live in. Those session host VMs would live in Azure. You would also have to have an Azure Active Directory tenant, so Office 365, Azure AD, identity in the cloud basically would have to exist as well. If not, that would be something that could be stood up as well to facilitate, a WVD implementation.
Yep, great. Yeah, and I also just wanted to point out just a success story. So we have a customer that we're currently engaged with in the insurance industry. They're a good mid-sized company, and so we did a cost analysis compared to their existing Citrix solution, and over a period of 5 years, it's going to save them well into six figures. It's going to save them hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of switching to WVD. We did a proof of concept with them, which Jason led here a few weeks ago. The user community loved it. They liked the interface better than Citrix. Again, like Jason pointed out a few minutes ago, it's a true Windows 10 experience. So it's a better user experience than they were getting with Citrix. And and so then we finished out sort of that proof of concept. We got the go ahead to move forward, and so now we're in the midst of actually deploying it out. And just so far, the response from the user community has just been great. They're really thrilled. They love the fact that it's a better user interface than they had before, and they like the fact that they can access it from a browser. So we've got a few minutes left. What other questions does anyone have before we wrap up here? How long does it take to finish a deployment from proof of concept? Well, then for that, I have to give the standard consulting answer, which is it depends. But I think that I think there's a lot of variables there. I think, it could be, depending on the number of applications that you have that you need to integrate, it could be anywhere from a week or two, to several weeks. I don't see this, for most organizations, I don't see this as a super long project. Like, this is not a project that's going to stretch out for months and months. I think if you've got a clear idea of what you need, really this is a project that for the majority of most organizations, it's going to take 1 to 2 months to get the whole thing knocked out. And then for a lot of smaller organizations or organizations that just don't have a very complex computing environment, it could be completed in a few weeks. So the deployment process is not lengthy for this at all.
Not at all.
Good. All right. Well, one last call for questions before we wrap up here. Okay. Well, once again, thanks for joining us. Hope you're continuing to stay safe, and we will talk to you next time. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.